Darling, you left my heart in pieces on the floor. So tell me, why shouldn't I break some things of yours? I'll smash a lamp, that antique chair, that stupid thing you always wear. I'll smash a vase, the radio, those little teacups from Lemon, your wacky paintings on the walls. Darling, pow, I'll smash them all. Hey guys, RanterInShades here, exercising my First Amendment rights vlog style, and today I have a video that has nothing to do with music. Rather, it has to do with one of the most crucial components of my childhood, and something I continue to look back on to this day, as well as the reason why I'm wearing my Nicktoons shirt today. I'm referring to none other than Hey Arnold, my favorite show growing up.
Coping with erectile dysfunction?
Excuse me? Who the fuck gave you permission to come onto my channel?
I did, fucko! And we talked about doing a crossover on a live stream a couple of months ago. You don't remember? How could you possibly forget?
I see. Anyway, we're gonna be going over my top 10 personal favorite episodes of Hey Arnold. The long-awaited Jungle movie is coming out this year, and I'm feeling the hype, yo!
And I'm feeling some intestinal distress, and you're the cause of it.
Are you gonna be making snarky comments all throughout this video?
Damn, skip it, bitch cakes.
Okay then, let's begin. Number 10. In Career Day, the kids in Mr. Simmons' class get paired with an adult for Career Day and actually have hands-on experience working these jobs, something I really wish my school did. Anyway, Arnold gets paired with the Jolly Ollie Man, aka Willie, who's an immensely negative person who hates his job and hates kids. Kinda like me. Meanwhile, all the other kids get to have really fun and exciting jobs, like Gerald, who works as a fireman, and Phoebe, who works with Ernie demolishing buildings. Because of the Jolly Ollie Man's unlikable personality, he barely makes enough money, and Arnold has a shitty time on the job and doesn't really get to help out selling the ice cream. Arnold then witnesses Willie's boss arrive and tell him that if he doesn't sell out his entire truck by the end of the day, he'll be fired. What surprises Arnold is that the boss...
He's my dad.
Your boss is your own dad? And he's gonna fire you?
Willie then turns to Arnold for help in improving his image and his reputation so that more people will buy his ice cream. By the end of the day, the entire town basically rejoices as Willie tosses out free ice cream for everyone. Thus, he gets to keep his job and Arnold gets a passing grade for Career Day. The thing I really like about this episode is that Arnold really sticks his neck out for this guy that clearly just hates everything. I mean, I get that driving an ice cream truck isn't the most glamorous job out there, but if you don't have a positive attitude, no one will, and you'll fail. This is coming from a guy who worked one summer delivering pizza. Was that the most joyous job I've ever had? Clearly not, but I made the best of it. I was making money and I got to drive around listening to music. What could be better? I also like seeing the change in the Jolly Ollie Man's character throughout the episode. He initially seems reluctant to change, even in the face of losing his job, but I like how much he trusted in Arnold and listened to all the pro tips Arnold gave him, and he actually came out strong in the end.
One of the things I love about this episode is the message. That being, don't let your circumstances control who you are, and a little change in perspective can truly make a difference. In the first half, Willie's a complete piece of shit towards Arnold, constantly waving his grade over his head and making him feel miserable because he was forced to participate in the Career Day activity by his father. For most of the episode, you can't help but hate the guy for acting so cruel, not only towards Arnold, but towards his customers in general. Though the reasoning behind his ill temperament is surprisingly understandable, and you really do empathize for the guy. And of course, the way Arnold helps him turn his attitude around in the nick of time to help him keep his job is what makes this episode stand out. Throughout the episode, Arnold ponders what kind of fascinating things his friends are learning from their Career Day choices, but in the end, it's Arnold who ends up teaching Willie a thing or two about kindness and perseverance. Also, his name is Willie. There's the inevitable dick joke for you.
Number 9. In Back to School, Grandpa reveals to Arnold that he never finished school or received his diploma. So, in order to fulfill his long-lost goal, he enrolls in PS 118 and joins Arnold's class. Throughout the episode, we see him pass both 4th and 5th grade, excelling in his academics and becoming pretty popular for an old man going back to elementary school. But then comes 6th grade. Everything about the class, from the work to the students, frightens Grandpa. So he takes on a 1950s bad boy, Steely Phil attitude and becomes accepted by the 6th grade students, vandalizing property and getting into lots of trouble. Principal Warts then notifies Arnold that Phil's about to flunk out, which prompts him to open up to Arnold about how scared he is. With Arnold's help, he buckles down and gets past his fear and walks away receiving his diploma.
I want that diploma!
Let's get it.
Right after my nap!
I've always found this episode pretty amusing for the situation alone. Seeing Grandpa in an elementary school environment almost makes sense in a way. He was always one of the more whimsical characters, so he seems to fit in pretty well. The pacing of the episode is pretty quick, given that Grandpa is able to move up a grade after only a couple days, but again, the situation is just amusing. I also love the scene where he meets up with the 6th grade girls to sneak into a PG-13 movie.
Hey, Connie, Maria, what you taking, Eddie?
Grandpa, where are you going?
We're gonna sneak into a PG-13 movie.
But you're 81. You can get into a PG-13 movie anytime.
Grandpa Phil is one of my favorite characters on the show, and I almost put this episode on my list if it wasn't for a certain sunglasses-wearing fuckboy. Nevertheless, I've always found this episode to be really funny. The way Grandpa becomes the stereotypical bad boy and rebels against the teacher and pretty much picks up the negative mindset of some of the teenagers in the class is partially what makes this episode so funny. He's not acting his age the whole time, and he just doesn't really seem to fit in with the other kids. Like, I can understand being discouraged about not getting your high school diploma, but when you're in your 80s and you're trying to get your elementary school diploma, yeah, Grandpa really needs to get his priorities straight. But either way, this is definitely my favorite Grandpa-themed episode. Oh, and how can we forget the drug references?
And you've still got plenty of brain cells.
No, not since Woodstock.
Number 8. In Arnold's room, Sid borrows Arnold's room to impress his rich friend Lorenzo since he feels inadequate next to him. He literally has to put up and take down decorations from his own room, always refer to Arnold's grandpa as his own grandfather, and also isn't able to get on Arnold's computer since he doesn't know the password. Really goddamn smart right there. Sid's just overall really nutty about using Arnold's room and ends up making the issue even more complicated than it needed to be. I mean, you're working on a school project. What does your room have to do with anything? Eventually, when Lorenzo reschedules the meeting place to be in Sid's room, quote unquote, Arnold is playing cards with Gerald, Harold, and Stinky, and Sid is exposed. Sid is another one of my favorite characters, and I like episodes like this, Sid's Revenge, and Sid the Vampire Slayer, where he goes way over his head. It's weird and off the wall, and for that reason the episode's funny to me. Arnold's room sticks out to me above those two, mainly because of all the trouble he goes through to set up Arnold's room as his own room. The setup and takedown is really quick, and there's really fast music to emphasize it.
It just goes to show that if you lie to people about who you really are, they're gonna find out one way or another. You can try to fabricate your life as much as you want, but the closer that you get to the people you want to impress, the more likely they're going to see through the fabrication. From what I've seen, Sid has always been that one character who seems to try a bit too hard to impress the people that he cares about. Whether he's trying to repay a debt like when Arnold saves him from the plywood pancake chicken, or in this situation when he's just trying to live up to Lorenzo's standards and taste. He doesn't come off like he's trying to overwhelm Lorenzo, he just really wants to impress him. And while it's entertaining to see to what extent he's taking to keep the facade going, I sort of empathize with him because I've been in his shoes a few times before. But in the end, it's nice to see that he's able to resolve things with Lorenzo. And again, it really does boil down to just being yourself and not letting your anxiety get the best of you. True friends won't judge you based on your social or economic class. And if people don't want to accept you for who you are, then that's their damn problem, and then go get butt-fucked by a cattle prod and a glass jar of peanut butter. The chunky kind, because fuck those people.
Number 7. Oh boy, if you ever wanted to know what Arnold and Helga ending up together would look like, Married is the episode. All those poor souls shipping the two of them and their fanfiction stories and DeviantArt drawings, this is their episode. It admittedly gets me pretty giddy watching this episode as well. The episode showcases both Arnold and Helga dreaming about what being married to each other would be like after Rhonda pairs them together using one of those little paper fortune teller things that girls like to play with in elementary school. Helga imagines everything being perfect, Arnold telling Lila to fuck off, and even becoming the first female president. You know, kinda like a certain other lady almost was. And using some James Bond spy gear to rescue the first gentleman from a kidnapper, who turns out to be Lila. I guess this is what you get for friend-zoning the guy, huh? Meanwhile, Arnold imagines everything being terrible. He's tricked into saying I do, he's forced to work a loading dock job at Big Bob's Beeper Emporium, and somehow has a bundle of kids dumped on him. And Helga doesn't give a shit at all. But one thing that sticks out to me is the way the episode ends. In Arnold's dream, when he confronts Helga, she's about to reveal her feelings for him. In his own dream. But before she can really say anything more, his alarm goes off. So much for that. Still, it's a pretty big moment in the series, at least until the movie came out, when shit got real. Married is one of the most standout episodes in the last season, and it's really entertaining.
I love how both dreams are so overemphasized and inflated. Like, on one hand, in Helga's dream, basically like Shade said, is like some kind of bloated fanfiction where literally everything goes her way. From her becoming president to becoming a Solid Snake-esque spy and something about pastrami on rye. It's also batshit crazy. On the other hand, we have Arnold's dream where he's absolutely miserable, being forced to be part of Bob's Beeper Emporium and being the father of some particularly ugly children. Both scenarios are really funny, though it's definitely around the end where things really stand out, where Helga finally starts opening up to Arnold about her feelings within Arnold's dream, almost as if it's what Arnold subconsciously wants to hear from her. Personally, I believe that our dreams are abstract reflections of our innermost desires and fears, and to a certain extent, it's our brain's way of subconsciously trying to rationalize our own realities. The dream that Arnold is having represents both what he fears might happen and what he'd want to see happen in that scenario. It's one of the things that I actually like about a lot of the dream sequences that they throw in with some select episodes. Okay, maybe I'm looking a little bit too closely into that, but who cares? It's a freaking kids cartoon.
Number 6. Pigeon Man, an episode most fans of Hey Arnold seem to love. In this episode, Arnold takes his sick pigeon Chester to a man known as the Pigeon Man, who has a way with birds. He takes care of Chester and opens up to Arnold about how he loves pigeons, and how he is essentially isolated from humanity. Arnold takes him out for pizza and is spotted by Harold, Stinky, and that short black kid I don't think we know the name of. They're weirded out by Pigeon Man and how nice Arnold is being to him, and decide to intrude onto his property and wreck his stuff. When Arnold and Pigeon Man return to the destroyed rooftop, Pigeon Man gives a very moving speech to Arnold about how he is different and doesn't understand people. He decides after this cruelty that took place on his roof that although Arnold helped him see that there are still good people in the world, he needs to leave. So he flies away. I've never really understood his decision to fly away with his pigeons, and I think that's what people find to be beautiful about this scene. It moves them because it confuses them. Pigeon Man is a strange person who views himself as incompatible to society. Having grown up as a shy kid who was very selective on who I was friendly with, as much as that worried my parents, I can relate to how Pigeon Man feels about people. There are really shitty people in the world, but eventually we need to make peace with society and try to see the good in people. That's a message I think a lot of people could really stand to think about these days, especially in this political climate with Donald Trump being president and where all these groups of people are just at each other's throats. There are still good people, and Arnold was able to help Pigeon Man realize that.
Pigeon Man. That one episode that everyone seems to remember the most. I wouldn't call it one of my absolute favorite episodes, which is probably a very, very blasphemous thing to say if you're part of the cult of the 90s millennials, but I still love it nonetheless, and there are aspects that I can really relate to. Now gather round, kids, and let me tell you a story that probably has nothing to do with this episode, but still it somehow relates to it. I don't know, I'm confusing like that. Shut up! You see, I grew up being a lone wolf of sorts. From the many schools that I attended, I was always looked at as one of the weirder kids. That isn't to say that I didn't have my small circles of good friends, friends, though I was really lacking in social skills, and in some cases, I was somewhat of an outcast because of it. And sometimes I was kind of a bastard. In general, I had a lot of difficulty making and maintaining friends, and one of the things that sorta helped me cope with my lacking of social skills was making stupid videos on YouTube, mostly consisting of bad YouTube poops and the farting preacher, all made with Windows Movie Maker, before I realized that Windows Movie Maker is a piece of shit, and then I moved on to Movie Studio Platinum 12, and then Sony Vegas. Yeah, I know, not exactly the kind of thing one would confidently write in the first chapter of their success story, and again, I know this probably has no direct correlation to the episode, though I feel like it somewhat connects to the message, because in some way, I feel like those videos were my pigeons, if that makes sense. As in some kind of projects to escape from people's bullshit. Kinda like Pigeon Man, cause he used those pigeons to escape from people's bullshit, and yeah, I think you guys get what I'm saying here. People are full of shit, just like that Slipknot song. And if it wasn't for those videos, I probably wouldn't have moved on to become so interested and passionate about filmmaking. I can't say this episode completely inspired me, but there's always been something about the general message that I've always found uplifting and comforting. Just because some people may not understand you doesn't mean you still can't make a difference from what makes you different. And even if some people may be selfish, will take you for granted, and try to destroy you, there will always be other people out there with kind hearts who will do what they can to show their compassion and understanding. Good people still exist in this world, and even in the worst possible times, good people will always find their way to help you pick up the pieces.
Number 5. In Cool Party, Rhonda invites Arnold to one of her parties in which only cool kids, quote-unquote, are invited to. Much to Arnold's disappointment, none of his friends are invited, as Rhonda views them all as geeks. So he goes to the party, and he ends up having a really boring time. So he decides to leave and meet up with his friends. There, they plan on throwing a geek party on the roof of Arnold's house. Ironically, Arnold's geek party ends up being more popular than Rhonda's cool party, as nearly everyone in the neighborhood shows up and has a blast. Even Rhonda's guests all leave her party one at a time and jump ship to Arnold's party. Eventually, Rhonda is left all alone and decides to go to Arnold's party herself. It really goes to show the effect of excluding. Being an elitist bitch like that is not gonna leave you with much of anything. Rhonda basically realized that she would rather be with her friends than people who fit a certain label. So she let go of her labels for the sake of just having fun at a party. I like the episode mainly because it's cool seeing everyone band together and throw a genuinely entertaining party, as well as seeing Rhonda get her comeuppance after excluding just about everyone she knows from her cool list. And of course we can't forget Curly freeing all the animals at the zoo.
Free the animals!
Poor twisted little freak.
One thing I find interesting about Rhonda's party is once she has everyone on her cool list at her house, she immediately starts shit-talking people on her geek list, which is essentially why Arnold left and why the others soon followed. It just goes to show that if you pick and choose who is worthy to be within your clique based on who fits within your ideal mold of perfection, you'll find that your circle of friends will be much smaller and will lack variety. And in some cases, you might end up with no friends at all. And I think we've all been in situations where we weren't invited to a party that we wanted to go to and being excluded from things because of being different. It's a shitty feeling to feel excluded, though it doesn't mean you still can't improvise.
Number 4. Eugene was always one of my favorite characters on the show. I like how despite him being a jinx with probably the best catchphrase on the show, he was always one to look on the bright side. He also had a very cheerful, innocent outlook on life, and it ends up being pretty infectious. In Eugene Goes Bad, the Fire Nation attacks. And that all changed. In the episode, Eugene goes with Arnold and Gerald to a live shooting of his favorite superhero show, The Abdicator. While there, he witnesses the actor playing the Abdicator having a stunt double do his stunts. Prior to this, he genuinely believed in the Abdicator and viewed him as being real, both for his morals and his actions, but seeing the stunt guy crushes him. So he calls the actor, Maurice, a phony and rids his life of the Abdicator. If the Abdicator is fake, then by proxy the show's morals must be too. He throws his Abdicator stuff out the window, including a perfectly good TV, paints his walls black, and takes on a bad persona. This alarms not only Arnold, but also a little kid, I think his name's Michael, who views Eugene as someone who sets a good example for him. Later, he sees the kid dangling from his fire escape and realizes that kids like him need a hero. And like the jinx he is, he too finds himself dangling from the fire escape. Meanwhile, Maurice is really hurt by Eugene's comments towards him. When he takes a walk away from his agent, he sees Eugene dangling and comes to a similar realization that someone like Eugene needs a hero and a role model. Because without good role models, we basically become pieces of shit. Eugene learns that even a normal guy that plays a superhero on TV can still be a hero and preach good morals despite the abdicator being a work of fiction. This has always been my favorite episode about Eugene because he goes through a lot of personal transformation and even tries to overcome his clumsiness. And I think he looked pretty badass in that leather jacket, paying an homage to the episode False Alarm, where he gets accused of pulling the fire alarm by actually pulling the fire alarm. The episode also features my favorite piece of music in the show's score, Eugene Paints It Black. It's basically metal fused with jazz. Jim Lang is one of my favorite composers, if not my favorite. The music on Hey Arnold was always a standout characteristic of the show, but this piece is something else.
More or less, this is the classic story of why you shouldn't put your heroes up on a pedestal. Let's face it, we all have public figures that we look up to. We've all had musicians, actors, in some cases politicians, and all sorts of famous people who we've idolized at some points in our lives. And we've all allowed ourselves to imagine, based on public image, that our idols are nothing but perfect human beings who could do no wrong. The thing that we all seem to forget when we lift these people up so high is that they are still human beings. And as human beings are inherently flawed and will have drastically different perspective on things than most of us average Joes and Josephines. Some perspectives may be a little more humble and enlightened, while others more cynical, egocentric, and tyrannical. And if you're still convinced that your idols are completely squeaky clean, might I suggest watching a couple of seasons of BoJack Horseman. Only we as individuals can craft our own moral compasses. It's perfectly okay to take influence from others, whether they're famous or just from down the street, though one shouldn't try to follow every footstep that their idols make, for they may find themselves walking down a path that was not intended to be tread on.
Number 3. In Rhonda's glasses, Rhonda is told that she needs glasses, which upsets her as it will ruin her social status and keep her from being one of the, quote, cool kids. She was always one to tell the geeky-looking kids that they need to move to the back of the bus, but when she gets her glasses, she receives the same treatment. Although she's initially reluctant to it, she receives a good deal of support from Eugene, Sheena, Brainy, and Curly as they help her adjust to the geek lifestyle. This lifestyle consists of sitting at the wobbly lunch table, playing with a deflated ball, and not being able to reserve the Foursquare court. Rhonda eventually warms up to Eugene and the others and inspires them to assist her in standing up to the girl, forcing them to move to the back of the bus. She makes a point in declaring that no one should be told where to sit on the bus. This episode pays serious homage to Rosa Parks and the civil rights movement. Already, the civil rights movement is a very powerful thing to be taught about in school, so the plot in this episode was also very powerful. It helps showcase what exactly the civil rights movement and Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on the bus was all about, but tells the story in a more relatable context. Like with Cool Party, I like seeing Rhonda learn her lesson about how she treats people different from her. Character transformation and growth is always a really cool thing to see.
It's so strange how we used to think that wearing glasses made us look like geeks back in the day. Like there was somewhat of a stigma to it. In fact, there was a point in time where I used to wear glasses, though a little double-chin 13-year-old me sort of stopped wearing them because of how self-conscious I felt about how they made me look, and I never allowed myself to get used to them. I actually still need glasses because of an astigmatism in my right eye, though of course I am a broke college student and I don't have insurance at the moment. But anyways, I too like the references and parallels that they make with the Rosa Parks incident and the civil rights movement, using simple things like wearing glasses or copiously vomiting as ways to paint a picture that we should embrace our differences as human beings and accept each other for who we are and not the pieces of eyewear that we place upon the bridges of our noses. It's simplistic, yet it still speaks volumes.
Number 2. Now this one's a little personal. If you remember the video I made about my religious views, you'll know that I come from a Jewish family. That's one reason I found myself able to relate to Harold a lot in the series. Apart from his religious affiliation, he was always a misunderstood character who doesn't always know how to relate to others, which was a lot like my childhood. My mom picked up on that too, and that's why she not only really liked Harold as well, but really loved this episode as well. The title Harold's Bar Mitzvah should be really self-explanatory. Harold is about to have his bar mitzvah, but he gets intimidated by the pressures of being a man, quote unquote. He realizes he can't take any more shortcuts, and that it's time for responsibility to kick in. So because all this freaks him out, he decides to bail on his bar mitzvah and run away to live on Elk Island. While on his way to the boat dock, he runs into Arnold, and they encounter some things that show Harold that he is capable of utilizing the fundamentals of Judaism and performing mitzvahs, which means good deeds, in real life. He helps a lost child find his mother, gives a kid his popsicle so he and his friend will stop fighting over their other popsicle, and literally says a prayer called the Shema, a prayer about how there is only one God, when a jerk-off on the bus tells him, say your prayers. But despite having utilized these fundamentals and realizing he is capable of being a man, Harold insists on running away to Elk Island. Everyone, his rabbi, parents, and friends, are disappointed. But then Harold bursts through the doors and fluently performs his bar mitzvah. Fun fact, the prayer he recites is the beginning part of a prayer called Ve'ahavta, which is about how you shall love God with all your heart and take his commandments to heart and continue to pass them down. Even though I don't follow the religion anymore, I still remember my bar mitzvah, which was 10 years ago as of the beginning of December. There was a lot of stuff I had to do to prepare for the occasion. There was a lot of planning as well. A lot was going into this, and after all was said and done, I came out feeling really accomplished. For some people, however, it's not as easy. It can be really stressful preparing to read in Hebrew from the Torah, along with other various prayers that are part of the service. Even at the time, this was an episode of Hey Arnold that I always thought of. I liked how this show, as well as Rugrats, incorporated something like Judaism into the show. Judaism is a minority religion in modern society, and it slightly bothered me as a kid that there was never much Jewish representation in TV shows, as it was always all about the Christian holidays. With that in mind, I always thought it was cool that Hey Arnold had an episode about a Jewish tradition. One other thing, one of my bar mitzvah gifts was this painting of me saying, "Today I am a man." That's actually a line from this episode when Harold walks into the temple.
Have some faith, Rabbi. I'm here. Today, I am a man.
Thus is the nature of how special of an episode this is to me. Mazel tov, Harold.
I think most of you should know, unless you've already seen my video, that Harold is my favorite character from the series because he sort of reminds me of myself in some ways, besides being overweight, of course. He always tries to put some kind of big, intimidating, tough guy persona on him as if he's harder than a lumpy stool that just won't pass. Though underneath it all, he has a gentle heart and he just wants to do good. Although if there's one thing that me and Harold don't have in common, it would have to be ideological differences. I was raised Episcopalian, though I've grown to be what I consider spiritual but not religious. I do believe in some sort of higher power, though I don't subscribe to any real religion. Not sure if that makes me agnostic, though I don't really care for a label at this point. Anyways, one of the things that I've always loved about this episode is Harold's change in attitude. It's so easy to crack under the pressure of something as big as a bar mitzvah, and how it can heighten one's perspective because of the seemingly crazy amounts of responsibilities that would come along with it. Though without even realizing it, Harold shows righteousness, charity, and prayer, proving to himself that he has the potential to be a good man in the eyes of his religion. He proves that he does have principles and can change for the better good. And that's one of the things that I love about this show in general. A lot of the characters find ways to change themselves for the greater good when an episode centers around them. Whether it be Harold realizing that he has the potential to be good, or Rhonda realizing that one's looks should not determine one's worth as a human being, or Oscar learning that the saxophone just isn't for everyone. Nah, I'm just kidding, but no matter which character, there's always this underlying moral that with a little bit of effort, anyone can make positive changes in their lives. That's one of the main reasons as to why I still love this show to this day, and Harold's Bar Mitzvah is another prime example of this concept.
I have a few honorable mentions here I want to briefly go over before revealing my favorite episode, and by a few, I mean quite a lot, because there's so much I wanted to include on this list. The first honorable mention is Part-Time Friends. I included this one mainly since this was the first episode of Hey Arnold I remember watching. It's the one where Arnold and Gerald get jobs at the flower shop and get into a major fight regarding who's being bossy and who's being lazy. As someone with some OCD tendencies, I can understand Gerald wanting things to be done in an orderly fashion, but the episode wants us to sympathize with Arnold and and view Gerald as being a dick, which he kinda was being, let's be honest. Of course, we can't forget the dream Arnold has of him and Gerald being old and still mad at each other, where the freakiest scene in the whole show takes place.
What did I tell you, short man?
This was also a pretty good episode. We rarely see Arnold and Gerald get in any strong disagreements, though I like how they're able to pull together when the time is right and resolve their differences. We all come to points where we bash heads with our closest friends, though it's only true friends who can find a way to find a compromise.
For my second honorable mention, I chose the flood. In this episode, the town is massively flooded and Arnold's class is trapped in the school. All the kids are pretty restless and unwilling to cooperate with Mr. Simmons, who wants to ensure that everyone is safe. So when he finds himself dangling from the school's fire escape, everyone has to work together to rescue him. I like this episode mainly because it's so off the wall. My town has actually had a couple floods that not only resulted in our basement floor being destroyed, but a street a few minutes away from us actually got so flooded due to being next to a river that the town got an army truck to transport people to their houses on that street. I had a friend at that time who lived there and actually got to ride the army truck, which is pretty exciting. Still, that flood was nothing like the flood in this episode, where the town is pretty much a giant swimming pool. Anything you'd like to say, DedMunkE?
Principal Wart's doing the salsa. That is all.
My next honorable mention is Eating Contest, where Grandpa trains Arnold for a contest where you eat oversized food. I like this episode for the training montage and how seriously Grandpa seems to take this contest, as well as how over the top the contest itself is, with all the weird food that the kids can barely finish without filling up and passing out. Of course, there's that human vacuum cleaner kid who eats like nobody's business, yet it apparently takes a giant ice cream sundae to get him to pass out.
I have a weird feeling that this episode somehow contributed to the obesity epidemic we have here in America, at least with those within the millennial crowd. On a serious note, I've always found this episode to be rather entertaining because of how Grandpa, like Shades mentions, gets so wrapped up in the competition and puts so much emphasis on how it's some kind of family tradition. Also, I initially thought that Harold was going to be a major contender, though I've always found it hilarious how he's the first one to be disqualified.
Next to my honorable mentions, I picked Mugged. This episode is almost like a retelling of Karate Kid. Grandma teaches Arnold self-defense, so he has what it takes to get his bus pass back from some asshole who beat him up for it. Which, that's basically identity theft right there, isn't it? Anyway, Arnold basically turns into, as he himself puts it, Bruce Lee. And that's one thing I like about the episode. The action is really awesome. The other thing that's cool is the edgy, flashy graphics when Arnold goes Super Saiyan, even though some people did literally nothing to warrant Arnold attacking them. It's also nice to have an episode where Grandma isn't acting like a complete loon bag for once.
This episode makes me wish I learned karate or some form of self-defense during my youth. I've always wanted to go around karate chopping people's clothes off with my bare hands, especially in the winter because everyone will have pointy nipples.
Again, why did I agree to have you on my channel?
Seriously though, I've always liked the bond that Arnold and Grandma have in this episode, not to mention the lesson that self-defense is important, but only when it's needed. Oh, and Grandma is quite the badass in this episode, swatting flies and shit. To think that I used to dismember flies as a kid. Ah, the memories.
Next to the honorable mentions is False Alarm, which I mentioned earlier here when we discussed Eugene Goes Bad. In this episode, Eugene gets blamed for pulling the fire alarm, and the meat of the episode, like the movie 12 Angry Men, surrounds the jury consisting of Arnold, Gerald, Helga, Phoebe, Harold, and Curly discussing the story and determining whether or not Eugene is guilty, each interpretation with some weird plot hole. Even as a kid, I always thought, Eugene doesn't wear glasses, are you guys retarded? By the end, Curly, after being silent throughout the episode, confesses to framing Eugene, which is actually our first introduction to how much of a psycho the guy is. The episode structure is pretty simplistic, but it's effective.
Curly is a fucking gem, and it's a shame that he didn't have many episodes with him as a central character. This being his first formal appearance, it was a very fitting introduction. Not to mention this episode seems to be taking some kind of inspiration from the Rashomon effect, where everyone has slightly or drastically different recollections of what happens during an investigation. Yeah, I've always loved these kind of stories.
And for my final honorable mention, I picked School Play. In this episode, Mr. Simmons' class puts on a performance of William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, which even as a kid I always thought was way too mature for an elementary school to be performing.
fourth graders doing Romeo and Juliet. What a dopey idea.
Arnold is basically forced to play Romeo, which influences Helga to manipulate a plot to get all the girls to give up the Juliet role so that she can play her and kiss Arnold. Again, because apparently that's okay to do in an elementary school play. This of course involves her revealing her feelings for Arnold to Lila, which I've always thought was the real reason Lila never liked Arnold. The episode also contains, in my opinion, the funniest scene in the entire show, when Arnold is rehearsing his lines.
Oscar?
Mr. Wynn?
Why do you always have to cheat, Oscar? Why can't you act like a normal person?
Me, what about you? You're wearing a dress.
That is to have Arnold. I am Juliet.
You're not Juliet. You're a sad man wearing a dress.
I am Juliet. Juliet!
I think it's safe to say that this episode introduced Romeo and Juliet to most of us 90s kids before we even heard about it in school. One aspect of the episode that I actually kinda like is when Helga reveals to Lila that she likes Arnold. She's perfectly okay with letting Helga take the spot because she had a feeling that Helga had a thing for Arnold all this time. It's kinda sweet considering the fact that I've never liked Lila, to be honest. It's mostly because of how sweet and kind and ever so fucking perfect that she is. Bitch is giving me shingles just thinking about it. And I also have to agree that Arnold practicing for his parts are some of the best scenes of this entire series.
For my #1 episode of Hey Arnold, I gotta go with Helga Blabs It All. Like I said in the video on DedMunkE's channel, I was never that big a fan of the episodes about Helga, mainly because of how hysterical she tends to act. Of course, there were always exceptions, and this is the biggest one. Helga Blabs It All is such a funny episode, and it really stands out in my mind above pretty much all the other episodes, and that's pretty much enough of a reason to view it as being my favorite episode of the show. So in this episode, Helga is at the dentist and is treated with laughing gas. While on the gas, she gets up and calls Arnold's house to leave a message revealing her feelings for him. Until she recovers and realizes what she did. So she sneaks into the boarding house to retrieve the cassette tape containing the message, because that's how answering machines worked at that time. She has to dodge all the boarders as well as Arnold and his friends and crawl through the air duct to get the tape. Somehow she enters Arnold's room through the vent where his funky couch is, all covered in dust, and everyone stares at her. It's really fucking awkward, but yet we still laugh at it. Thus, she makes it out with the tape in her possession.
One of the best assets of this show has always been its sense of comedic timing, and this episode is a prime example of this. I've always found this episode to be a comedic goldmine because of how every part of the situation increasingly gets more complicated, and it's vastly amusing how Helga is constantly going to greater lengths to try and erase her drug-induced voice message.
Phoebe, it's Helga. Listen, this is the mother of all emergencies, so what I'm about to ask you to do, you should just do, and don't ask me why, and don't say you're really not the kind of person that can actually do something like this. Just do it.
I don't know what you're talking about! Stop calling me!
There are plenty of parts that make you think that one thing is gonna happen, and then another thing happens, which always alters the course of what's really going on, especially in parts like when Grandma first hears the message. The first time I saw this episode a long time ago, I remember almost shitting myself because I thought she was actually going to comprehend what Helga was saying in the message, and then she'd relay it back to Arnold like any normal, non-senile person would.
Before I forget, there was a message for you. A young lady called.
Really?
Really?
What was her name?
Well, it was H something. Hell. Gosh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Hell. Oh, yes, here it is. Helen of Troy. Yeah. And Miss Troy wanted to tell you that she was selling a kind of passion fruit drink or something.
Though it's how she misinterprets it that completely killed my expectations and made it, in my opinion, one of the funniest jokes in the entire show. Bear with me when I say this, but part of me feels like this might be Hey Arnold's Band Geeks episode, where literally every single joke is perfectly timed and hilarious. And I can definitely see why Shades put this as his #1 choice too, and if he didn't choose this episode, I probably would have put this within my top 3.
Well, that about does it for this list. I'd love to know if you guys have a list of favorites you'd like to share in the comments, or if you just want to have a nice little nostalgic gush fest, that'd be cool too. Also, be sure to check out the top 10 list we did on DedMunkE's channel, where we totally don't rip off Nostalgia Critic, linked in the description. Thank you for watching this video, take care and have a nice day. I'm Shades.
And I'm DedMunkE from Mortified Productions.
And we'll see you next time.